April 21st, 1943. Tunisia. The air hangs thick with dust and diesel, the kind that coats your throat and makes every breath taste of war. Near the village of Mejez El Bab, a small reconnaissance unit of the American 1st Armored Division moves cautiously through a ravine carved by centuries of rain into the North African earth. The sun beats down mercilessly, turning tank hulls into griddles, turning men into creatures of sweat and squinting determination. Sergeant Frank Audick of the 13th Armored Regiment doesn't know it yet, but in less than an hour, he and his crew will stumble upon something that will change how American tankers understand their enemy. Something massive, something broken, something that shouldn't be there at all. The Tiger. I sits motionless in a dried riverbed, its right track blown apart, its engine silent. It looks like a cathedral of steel abandoned by its congregation. Audick's Sherman tank rounds the corner, and for a moment, time suspends itself. The Americans freeze. The Germans are gone. What remains is 56 tons of German engineering, blackened by fire, scarred by battle, and utterly, inexplicably alone. This is not how legends are supposed to look. To understand what Audick and his men felt in that moment, you must first understand what the Tiger I represented in the spring of 1943. It was not merely a tank. It was a psychological weapon, a moving fortress that had torn through Soviet T-34s on the eastern front and British Crusaders in the western desert with a kind of mechanical contempt. Its 88mm gun could penetrate nearly any Allied armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. Its frontal armor, 100 millimeters thick, could shrug off most Allied anti-tank rounds as if they were pebbles thrown by children. When Tiger tanks appeared on a battlefield, Allied tank crews were trained to withdraw, to call in air support, to do anything except engage directly. The German propaganda machine had built the Tiger into mythology. Newsreels showed them crushing enemy positions, unstoppable and godlike. Soldiers whispered about them in foxholes. Intelligence briefings treated them with the kind of reverence reserved for natural disasters. To face a Tiger was to face death. To capture one intact was unthinkable. Yet here it was, silent, vulnerable, real. Audick's crew approached with weapons raised, hearts hammering. They circled the machine like hunters around a fallen beast, half expecting it to roar back to life. But the only sound was the wind scraping across its armored hide and the crunch of boots on stone. One of the men climbed onto the hull, peered through the commander's cupola, and shouted down, "It's empty!" They left it. What they found inside would become the subject of heated discussion in Allied tank depots for months to come. Ammunition racks half full, personal effects scattered across the floor, a crumpled photograph, a tin of tobacco, a letter written in sharp Gothic script. And in the driver's compartment, a logbook. Stained with oil and sweat, its pages told a story that contradicted everything the propaganda had promised. The Tiger had traveled less than 120 miles. Before running out of fuel, American tankers had been trained to respect German engineering. They'd seen the sleek efficiency of the Panzer IV, the brutal simplicity of the Stugger III. But they had also been raised in a nation where fuel was abundant, where supply lines stretched unbroken across oceans, where the industrial might of Detroit could churn out tanks faster than the enemy could destroy them. To an American crew, a tank's range was almost an afterthought. You filled up, you fought, you filled up again. The idea that a tank, especially one as fearsome as the Tiger, could be rendered useless by something as mundane as an empty fuel tank seemed almost absurd. But there it was, written in meticulous German handwriting. Fuel consumption rates that would make any American logistics officer wince. The Tiger Y, with its 21-liter Maybach HL230 engine, devoured fuel at a rate of roughly 500 liters per 100 kilometers on roads. and nearly double that across rough terrain. In practical terms, the tank's 700-liter fuel capacity gave it an operational range of roughly 60 to 120 miles, depending on conditions. In the North African desert, where supply convoys were constantly harassed by Allied air power and where every liter of fuel had to be trucked across the Mediterranean and then across hundreds of miles of hostile terrain, this was a catastrophic limitation. The Americans had expected invincibility. What they found was fragility wrapped in steel. Audic's crew spent hours examining the Tiger, taking photographs, making sketches, measuring everything. They marveled at the precision of its construction. The interlocking road wheels, the carefully welded seams, the gun that could reach out and kill at distances American tankers could barely imagine. But they also noted the impracticalities, the overlapping wheels that trapped mud and froze solid in winter, the transmission that required specialized tools and trained mechanics to repair, the sheer weight that made the tank impossible to cross most bridges and prone to bogging down in soft ground. And always, they returned to the fuel. One tanker, Corporal James Bates, would later write in a letter home, "We thought the Tiger was unbeatable because it was better built. Turns out it was unbeatable only when it had gas. Without fuel, it's just a very expensive pillbox." Makes you realize war isn't just about who has the best weapons. It's about who can keep them running. The story of the Tiger's capture spread quickly through Allied ranks, carried by word of mouth and official intelligence reports. Engineers were flown in from Tunis to examine the vehicle in detail. Photographers documented every angle. Eventually, the Tiger was loaded onto a transport ship and sent back to the United States, where it would be displayed at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, studied by American tank designers and used to train crews on enemy capabilities and weaknesses. But the real revelation wasn't technical. It was philosophical. For months, American tankers had feared the Tiger as if it were supernatural. They'd heard the stories of single Tigers holding off entire battalions, of 88mm rounds punching through Sherman armor like it was paper. They'd been told to avoid direct engagement, to rely on numbers and tactics rather than raw firepower. The psychological weight of facing a Tiger had been crushing. But now, they knew the truth. The Tiger was mortal. Not because its armor could be penetrated, it largely couldn't, not from the front, but because it was shackled by logistics in a way American tanks were not. A Sherman crew could roll into battle, knowing that fuel trucks and supply depots stretched all the way back to the Atlantic coast. A Tiger crew rolled into battle, knowing they had maybe 100 miles before they became a stationary target. This knowledge changed everything. Tankers began to understand that the war was not a duel between machines, but a contest between systems. The Tiger might win individual engagements, but the Sherman would win the war, not because it was better, but because there were more of them, because they could be repaired in the field with common tools, because they could go farther on a tank of gas, and because American industry could replace losses faster than the Germans could inflict them. The Tiger was a masterpiece, but masterpieces, the Americans learned, are useless if you can't keep them fed. There is a peculiar irony in the fact that the Tiger's greatest weakness was born from the same obsession with perfection that made it so formidable. German engineers had designed the tank to excel in every measurable category: armor thickness, gun penetration, crew comfort, optical precision. But they had done so without fully accounting for the realities of total war. The grinding, unglamorous logistics that keep armies moving. The Maybach engine was a marvel of engineering, producing 700 horsepower and capable of propelling 56 tons of steel at speeds approaching 25 miles per hour on roads. But it was also a gasoline-hungry monster in an army increasingly starved for fuel. Germany's oil supplies were precarious even in the early war years, dependent on synthetic production facilities and imports from Romania. By 1943, every liter of fuel was a strategic resource, and the Tiger consumed fuel at rates that would have been luxurious, even for Allied standards. American tankers, by contrast, drove machines designed with logistics in mind. The Sherman's radial aircraft engine, originally designed for planes, was reliable, easy to maintain, and relatively fuel-efficient. Its range of roughly 150 miles on a full tank wasn't spectacular, but it was enough, and more importantly, American supply lines ensured that fuel was always available. The difference wasn't just technological. It was industrial, organizational, cultural. When Audic's crew examined the Tiger's logbook, they found entries detailing fuel consumption rates that varied wildly depending on terrain. In one entry, the crew noted consuming nearly 800 liters in a single day of cross-country maneuvering, more than a full tank. Another entry described a road march that stretched the fuel to its theoretical maximum, but only by moving slowly and carefully, avoiding any detours or combat maneuvers. This was not a weapon of flexibility. It was a weapon of precision deployment, effective only when used exactly as intended, along predictable routes, with guaranteed supply lines. In the chaos of North Africa, where front lines shifted daily and supply convoys were constantly under attack, the Tiger became less of an asset and more of a liability. The Americans had stumbled upon a truth that would define the war. Perfection is the enemy of sufficiency. In the weeks following the Tiger's capture, Allied intelligence officers interviewed dozens of German prisoners who had served in Tiger battalions. Their accounts painted a picture far removed from the propaganda. They spoke of crews who spent more time waiting for fuel deliveries than engaging the enemy. They described the frustration of watching enemy tanks retreat beyond engagement range, knowing that pursuit was impossible without draining fuel reserves needed for withdrawal. They recounted the terror of mechanical breakdowns far from repair depots, knowing that a disabled Tiger would likely have to be destroyed by its own crew to prevent capture. One captured officer, a lieutenant from the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, admitted bitterly, "The Tiger is the finest tank in the world for exactly 100 kilometers. After that, it's a monument to German engineering waiting to be outflanked." The symbolism was not lost on the Americans. Here was the Tiger, the ultimate expression of German military philosophy, meticulous, powerful, imposing, brought low by the same scarcity that plagued the Third Reich's entire war effort. Meanwhile, American tanks, less impressive on paper, kept rolling because they were part of a system that valued abundance over excellence, reliability over perfection. This contrast became a recurring theme in American discussions of the war. Soldiers would joke that the Germans built one perfect tank, while Americans built 100 good-enough ones. Officers would cite the Tiger's fuel consumption in logistics briefings as a cautionary tale against over-engineering. The captured Tiger became a teaching tool, not just for understanding enemy capabilities, but for understanding the nature of industrial warfare itself. And slowly, the fear began to fade. By late 1943, as the Allies prepared for the invasion of Italy and eventually France, the lessons of the captured Tiger had permeated American tank doctrine. Crews were still taught to respect the Tiger's firepower and armor, but they were also taught to exploit its weaknesses. Intelligence reports emphasized the importance of cutting German supply lines, of forcing Tigers to maneuver over rough terrain, of using air power to destroy fuel depots and transport columns. The psychological shift was profound. Where once American tankers had seen the Tiger as an unstoppable monster, they now saw it as a dangerous but flawed opponent. The fear that had paralyzed some crews in early encounters gave way to a kind of calculated aggression. Sherman crews learned to work in groups, using mobility and numbers to outmaneuver Tigers, to force them into fuel-draining pursuits, to wait for the moment when the German beast ran dry. There is a recording, archived in the National World War II Museum, of a briefing given to Sherman crews before the D-Day invasion. The officer, a tank battalion commander, speaks in measured tones. The Tiger is not invincible. It's a victim of its own ambition. Every mile it drives, it's closer to empty. Every engagement it fights, it's burning fuel it can't easily replace. Your job isn't to slug it out toe-to-toe. Your job is to stay alive, keep moving, and outlast it. The Tiger might win the battle, but we're going to win the war. This was the new reality. The Tiger remained deadly, right up until it wasn't. And the Americans had learned to wait for that moment. The captured Tiger I now sits under glass at the United States Army Ordnance Museum. Its paint faded, its tracks frozen in place. Visitors walk around it with a mixture of awe and curiosity, reading plaques that describe its specifications, its battlefield record, its eventual capture. But few of them understand the deeper story, the story of what that empty fuel tank meant. It meant that technology alone cannot win wars. It meant that brilliance without resources is just expensive failure. It meant that the side with the simpler, more reliable, more abundant tools will outlast the side with the perfect, fragile masterpieces. The Germans built the Tiger to dominate battlefields. The Americans built the Sherman to cross continents. In the end, the war was decided not by who had the thickest armor or the biggest gun, but by who could keep their machines running one more mile, one more day, one more battle. Audick and his crew understood this instinctively when they stood beside that silent Tiger in the Tunisian dust. They saw the precision, the craftsmanship, the deadly potential. But they also saw the logbook. They saw the empty fuel gauge, and they understood that this beautiful, terrible machine was a prisoner of its own design. In the years after the war, Audick would give occasional interviews about his experiences in North Africa. When asked about the Tiger, he would always return to that moment of discovery, the dissonance between myth and reality, between fear and understanding. "We thought we were outgunned," he said in one interview recorded in 1987. "And we were. But we weren't outfought. Because at the end of the day, war is about endurance. It's about showing up tomorrow and the day after that. The Tiger could win any single fight, but it couldn't keep fighting. And that made all the difference. There is a deeper truth embedded in the story of that captured Tiger, one that extends beyond tactics and logistics into the realm of philosophy. The Tiger. I was a product of a nation that believed in hierarchy, in the superiority of the exceptional, in the idea that quality could triumph over quantity. It was a machine built to reflect the values of its creators, elite, powerful, demanding. The Sherman, by contrast, was a product of American industrial democracy. It was not the best tank. It was not meant to be. It was meant to be good enough, reliable enough, and numerous enough to overwhelm any advantage the enemy might claim through superior design. It was a machine built for mass production, for crews with varying levels of training, for conditions that could not be perfectly controlled. This philosophical divide played out across every aspect of the war. Germany fielded jets, while America fielded thousands of propeller planes. Germany built battleships of unmatched power, while America built aircraft carriers by the dozen. Germany poured resources into wonder weapons, while America poured resources into supply chains. And in the end, abundance defeated excellence. The captured Tiger stands as a monument to this truth. It represents the moment when American tankers stopped fearing German engineering and started understanding German limitations. It represents the shift from awe to analysis, from intimidation to calculation. But it also represents something more universal, something that echoes across history and across conflicts far removed from the sands of North Africa. It represents the realization that complexity is a vulnerability, that perfection is brittle, and that the most dangerous opponent is not the one with the best weapon, but the one who can keep any weapon in the fight. The Tiger ran out of fuel at 120 miles. The war went on for 2 more years, and every day, American tanks kept rolling, kept fighting, kept showing up. Not because they were invincible, but because they didn't have to be. That is the lesson Audic and his crew learned in April of 1943. That is the lesson the Tiger taught, even in silence, even in defeat. And that is the lesson that still echoes through the halls of military academies and the pages of history books. A reminder that wars are won not by perfection, but by persistence, by endurance, by the simple, unglamorous arithmetic of fuel in the tank and miles left to travel. The desert wind continues to blow across Tunisia, indifferent to the machines that once clashed there. The Tiger. I sits in its museum, a relic of ambition and miscalculation. And somewhere in the archives, Audic's photographs remain, images of a legend reduced to cold metal and empty gauges, proof that even the mightiest weapons are only as strong as the systems that sustain them. In the end, the Tiger was defeated not by a better tank, but by a better understanding of what war truly demands. Not glory, not perfection, just one more mile, just one more day. Just enough.